The voices of New Brunswick writers are the heart of WordCraft, a podcast aimed at creating community through words. WordCraft is a creation of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick, a nonprofit organization that helps New Brunswick writers to write, acquire skills, and showcase their talents to the world. The show is hosted and produced by Jenna Morton, with technical production by Tosh Taylor. The WFNB acknowledges that the land on which we live, work, and gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq and Mi'kmaq peoples. We honor the spirit of our ancestors' treaties of peace and friendship.
Hello, and welcome to Season 2 of WordCraft. My name is Jenna Morton, and I am honored to bring you conversations with writers from across the province on behalf of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. This year, 2025, marks the official 40th anniversary of the WFNB. To mark the occasion, we've invited some of the organization's founders to join us for a discussion filled with memories and history and hopes for the future. Our guests for this discussion are some of the founding members of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. And while they are, of course, all writers, they are also mentors, community builders, tireless champions for the creative arts in this province and beyond, and they are part of the history of this organization. Nancy Bauer has been at the heart of arts and literary culture in New Brunswick since moving to Fredericton in the 1960s. Her living room is one of legend among writers of a certain age, and one might say the birthplace of what became the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. She's a celebrated writer with a long career in arts journalism. Her work includes 5 published novels and a recently published collection of her newspaper columns entitled A Great Cloud of Witnessing. It's edited by Ian Letourneau and published by Chapel Street Editions. Nancy is also a past honorary president of the Writers Federation. Ann Brennan is a well-known social activist, an entrepreneur, and an author. She's published several books, including a biography of the real Klondike Kate, several poetry collections, and her Fairy Chronicles series. She's a founding member and past honorary president of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. And Allan Cooper is an award-winning poet and musician, a literary editor, and the first official president of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. His work includes more than a dozen published poetry collections, hundreds of workshops conducted throughout Canada and the United States, several translated works, and he's the founder of Owl's Head Press, a poetry publishing imprint based in Alma. I'd like to do some quick introductions and have everyone say hello. First, I'm going to introduce the current executive director for the Federation, Rhonda Bulmer. Hello and welcome.
Hello, Jenna. Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Well, thank you for wanting to continue the podcast and to want to start this season with a celebration of 40 years of the Federation.
Mm-hmm.
Before we get really into everything that happened before now, can you give a quick little snapshot of what the Writers Federation of New Brunswick is right now in 2025?
Well, right now in 2025, I would say the Writers Federation's slogan is creating community through words. And so everything that we do is designed to help writers across the province connect. So if it's workshops taught by really stellar writers in a given discipline, or if it's our 2 awards programs, which is the Brunswick Writing Competition and the New Brunswick Book Awards, and whether it's our events like Word Spring and Words Fall and other ad hoc events, retreats, it's an opportunity for writers to gather, to share what they know, to connect, because writing is a solitary experience, but that first bit is solitary, but then you share it and you get feedback and you and just talk with other people. It's a tremendously rewarding experience, I think. And so that's what we're continuing to try to do, and to have an impact in our small community. And I feel that it's a great privilege to be a part of it.
Well, thank you for that little snapshot of what the Federation is doing. And I think that sense of community and connection is something that's been at the core of this organization for 40 years now. And like I said, we have three of the founding members with us today. I'm going to just give you a little brief introduction of each of our guests. Nancy Bauer has been at the heart of arts and literary culture in New Brunswick since moving to Fredericton in the 1960s. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, Nancy.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you. And along with you, we have Ann Brennan, who is well known as a social activist, an entrepreneur, an author. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here and celebrate with you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And rounding out our group today, we have Allan Cooper, who is an award-winning poet and musician, a literary editor, and the first official president of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick. Welcome, Allan.
Thank you for having me today. I'm glad to be here with two of my favorite women. We've known each other for quite a long time, and it's like a gathering and a celebration as well.
Well, it does feel like we should all be in one room together, maybe in Nancy's living room, reimagining what things were like back in the early days. And I'd love to start the chat there, Nancy. If you could kind of paint a little picture. I alluded to that it's all kind of is said to have come about in your living room, and I'd love to know more about that.
Yes, my living room has been kind of a wonderful place, actually. It just happened that way. Uh, there was a young woman who came to our writers group who had, and her husband was a professor of math, and she called herself a, a, a workshop junkie. So she suggested we start the Maritime Writers Workshop, which we did. And there, various people from New Brunswick, but also really from all over Canada came. And they had such a great time, and it was a wonderful time, that they said, why can't we have some kind of thing like you have at the Ice House, McCord Hall, or at the Maritime Writers Workshop? And at that time, we were the only province in Canada that didn't have a federation. And I, of course, as you can tell from my accent, that I haven't lost for 65 years. You'd think I would, but anyway, I haven't. I was kind of gung-ho. And I often wonder now, how come this person who was just an immigrant wound up doing all this stuff? And I don't know why, but at any rate, we all met, and of course, and a woman named Mary Jane Lozier from Miramichi, a woman named, I think her name is escaping me, her last name was Richard, Valerie Evans, who was Valerie Simpson, in my living room. And we discussed this, and my living room, because I live in Fredericton, which, as you know, is the center of the universe. So, of course, it had to be my living room. But yes, and we discussed it, and we discussed how we would do it. And in the meantime, we've all looked at other places, Nova Scotia Saskatchewan was the first place to have such an organization. And one of the things we decided was that we'd make everybody eligible. Everybody would be welcome. Other places had done it differently, and I've often wondered whether this was a mistake or not. Other places had like two tiers, and you could have people who had published be part of it, but the upper tier and the people who ran everything were published authors. There were some real disadvantages of both.
Yes, I guess I'd go back to Nancy, maybe even a little bit further. For me, the beginning was really the Maritime Writers Workshops at UNB that Nancy, I think, was instrumental in starting. And when, I mean, I'm sort of going from back to the front by saying when Rhonda talks about creating community through words, to me, as a writer that lived in rural New Brunswick, I was over the moon to think that they'd even let me go to a workshop in Fredericton. And I was thrilled to death. And Nancy and I could tell a few stories about some of the meetings that we had and the fact that everybody was accepted because since I was a child, I said, I'm going to be a writer. And I did a lot of other things before I got around to it, but I wrote forever. And I can remember my first trip to Fredericton to the Maritime Writers Workshop, Nancy, and going with a little file folder. And I had, I think, 3 poems in it. And Fred Cogswell was so kind to me. I couldn't believe it. And then to sit in a workshop and to listen to Alden read his poems was like, being with the creator, honestly, because he was so well known by then. But not only that, I think the key was he was writing about where I lived, and he had written a poem about a bus stop in Bath, and nobody ever wrote about Bath, New Brunswick. And I was thrilled to know that you could write about where you lived. And out of those workshops, I forget how many I attended, the community began there. And Sheree Fitch was just a young girl, and David Adams Richard was a teenager, I think, maybe 20, I don't know. He came, and I can remember him, being at that workshop. And I'm sure I went at least 2 or 3 different summers. And for me, that was my beginning. And then when the opportunity came to join the group to create the Federation, I was all for it because it was just, to me, the vehicle to do what I believed in so strongly, which was that we need our stories told, and we need our local stories told. And you have to believe in it. And the group, like Nancy and her husband, they were all telling us we could do it. Yeah, it was exciting times. Yeah. Does that
You're
help?
making me cry.
Well, he was a poet, and the other one was, I was trying to think this morning, I know his name as well, but like Nancy says, we forget names now, or a little bit older. The gentleman from St. John, I was originally from St. John, and my hometown, and he wrote about a street across where I grew up, and I thought, he's writing about St. John. I can do it too. That was, to me, opened a whole new world. I thought you had to be famous or something to write about St. John. Not everybody did. Yeah. So the Maritime Writers Workshop, and through my connection with the people there, I went a few times to the ice house, and it was just sort of a natural birth of all of these people coming together. But I would go back and say the instigators were Fred and Alden and all the other authors and professors at UNB, and the people that really believed in the writing profession. And it meant so much to those of us that were just starting to believe in ourselves.
What's the ice house, Nancy? Ann, what's the ice house?
Well, Nancy's better probably to tell the details on that one, but it was a place where they were meeting, I think, once a week or maybe once a month. How did that go, Nancy? I just knew it was a pretty, how can I say, key position for anybody to get invited to the ice house.
No, that too was very definitely a place where anybody could come. And as Bill said, my husband said, the excitement was who was going to come through that door. And he loved that. Uh, and so nobody had to be invited. People did find out about it and came, and we welcomed them. Uh, there was an incredible range of people. Um, uh, and the strange thing is that about 10 minutes ago, and this is kind of like, um, I got a manuscript from Jocelyn Thompson. She started a thing called the New Brunswick Bibliography. It's a series, and there's 5 books so far and a couple in the works. And the bibliography for this 5th one is of the uh, McCord Hall or Ice House Gang or uh, Tuesday Night Group. They had 3 different names, and it was the work that people published at that time, not the work that they went on to publish later, but the work that published in the I think it was 13 years, 14 years that we met, and we did meet every week, Tuesday night, and we met, summer and winter, and I think the strange thing is that a West Coast writer, West Coast poet Dorothy Livesay had started this. She was a writer in residence at UMB, and she had people meeting in her apartment. And when Kent Thompson came to UMB, she invited him, and after she left, he decided to keep up the group. And eventually, well, at the first of it, we met in each other's homes, but eventually we settled on the ice house. He had kind of commandeered it. It was a wonderful building, but nobody was using it. So it had the most fantastic atmosphere. I mean, really, it was almost like a chapel, I think. Um, so, and Mary Lund came to that, and as a self-confessed workshop junkie, conceived the idea of the Maritime Writers Workshop, and then as Ann has said, everybody loved it so much, and they heard so much about the Tuesday Night Group, and since then, people have established these little writing places, little writing groups all over the place. I think there are quite a few really in Fredericton now. So,
Allan, I'm wondering, how did you get drawn into the sphere of all this? Because you weren't part of the Fredericton crowd or the UNB crowd.
No, I went to Mount A. I almost went to St. Thomas, but that didn't that when I was going to do music, and when I went to Mount A, I introduced to John Thompson, who's become a very important Canadian poet since that time. Although I also had association with Alden Nowlan. On the first day we had a meeting to elect the first president, and I went with my wife, and we were there, and we were doing our just going up to the meeting, and Peter Thomas came up to me and said, I want to nominate you for that position. And because Fred Cogswell, who was originally going to be the first president, had received an writer exchange program in Scotland, I believe. And so I didn't know what I was doing, and I think Lori leaned over and hit me on the elbow and said, "Why don't you do it?" And I said, "Well, I don't, whatever." I was a greenhorn. I was 29 years old. I had 3 small books of poetry published. I was about to take over a magazine called Germination from Harry Thurston. And I let my name stand, and it happened. But there's one little story I wanted to tell you about Alden Nowlan. He was at that meeting. It wasn't too long before he died, and before the vote, I decided I'd sneak outside. I smoked a pipe, and I wanted to go out, and I needed to calm my nerves because I didn't know what I was getting into really. I mean, I'd been involved with things at Mount A, but nothing like this. So I went outside, and Alden was there. He was having a cigarette. So we had a little conversation. And I said, "How's your writing going?" And he said, "I'm still scratching away." And it was so neat. And he came back, and he was sitting at the very back of the room that day. And when I came in, I saw there was Alden Nowlan. I'd never spoken to him before. So we had a little conversation outside. So that was neat. And he was always one of my favorite poets. Um, so Greg Cook came up when we started getting the Writers Federation going and gave us all kinds of advice. He was executive director of the Nova Scotia Writers Federation. And we had a committee, Ann and Nancy. I
Yes.
can remember some of the people who were on that committee, but can you guys fill me in? I know that Suzanne Alexander represented the government, and I remember that you were there.
Was Michael
And
Nowlan
Ann was
there?
there,
Yes, I think
and I think
Yeah.
who else was
Michael
on that
and Mary
committee?
Jane
I can't
and
quite remember
the girl from
everybody's
St.
name.
John.
Yeah, there was a group, and we would meet. We met at Nancy's place, and then everybody came to our house in Riverview. So we had several meetings, and Greg Cook came up and sat with us for one of those meetings and gave us all kinds of advice. I found them very helpful. The Nova Scotia writers were helping us.
When you were having those first meetings to bring this all together, what kind of vision did you have? What kind of discussions were you having about what you wanted to create?
Well, one of the things that Nancy mentioned was whether we would have two tiers or one tier. Nova Scotia Writers Federation had two tiers. We decided on one, so that it would be inclusive. That way you had established writers alongside beginning writers, and there could be a natural nurturing going on in that kind of situation. And I think that for the Writers Federation in New Brunswick, that worked very well. And I think it helped a lot of younger writers as they were coming up. And as Nancy said, there's two sides to that. But at the same time, if you got everybody together, it's like having you've got 3 or 4 professional musicians together, and then you bring in some children, and you let them play some instruments, and it feeds the creative process that way, and starts right at the bottom with the younger writers. So the first year or so, the year that I was president, we had a lot of things we were trying to do. We were trying to get money to establish and do more things, do book fairs and that kind of stuff, and eventually there ended up being a Writers Federation New Brunswick office in Fredericton. But we were trying to do that, and we tried to get a manuscript reading program together where people could send in their manuscripts. And when I talked to Greg, he said there are a lot of writers out there who will help you. So I contacted writers in the Atlantic region and Ontario and further west, and called them, and they agreed to sign up for that. So we got some things going. There were hiccups that first year because we were starting basically with nothing but our own enthusiasm. So yeah, it was an interesting process.
To Allan, the writers in the school, that was a great thing. And it was actually Michael Nowlan's idea, or we got it from him, sort of. because he used to have people into his classroom at Armocto High School, and it just seemed like such a great thing that, and it was, we were quite ahead of our times with that. Since then, all kinds of people have had that, but it was interesting because writers would go all over the place, and it's a strange thing. New Brunswick is a small place geographically, but and I suppose it's the terrible roads or the awful winters or whatever. We don't seem to go from place to place.
I actually wondered a bit if maybe both Anne and Allan, if you could kind of talk to the importance you think the Federation has had in the rural parts of the province in finding those connections. You kind of alluded to it a bit before, Anne, about the importance, but I'd love to hear a bit more about how you think creating this federation has helped grow literary, people through the province.
Well, absolutely, it did. I know even from my own part, I came back up home, of course, so as we progressed, and we formed a small group ourselves up here. There, it would come and go, and we'd meet, and I forget, there maybe be 4 or 5 of us, but we would continue to meet. And then, like I mentioned earlier, a group of us went down to the ice house from up here, which would have been, quite a trip for an evening. We drove down, and it was so exciting to go down. We were going to meet with all these people that were published, and it was a fun thing. So I'm still in the same place in rural New Brunswick, and was very knowledgeable about trying to write at a distance and not being able to go to everything, but. So that the Writers Federation itself was important, but the message was important too. I think we kept encouraging young writers. People would come and say, "Oh, I hear you're writing, yeah, yeah." And when Klondike Kate came out, to go back to the writers in school, it was published by Goose Lane, and they were very supportive. And I did a lot of schools when that book came out in the early 90s. I mean, that was big for me because you didn't make money, but you got your expenses, and you got to go to the schools and meet the children, and it supported not only the publication, but myself as a writer to gain confidence. And I always enjoyed the children. In fact, we're still inviting the children to come to the farm now since the Fairy Chronicles come out. The school children come here now and walk, and it promotes the book, but it also promotes the writing part of it. So yeah, it's key, I think, to have your own organization, and it's the friendship too, because I find as the years went by, I was always more than enthusiastic to help new writers myself, because I know how important it was for me in the beginning just to have some support. And yeah, so it's key, I think, to have your own organization that allows everybody in. Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of back and forth between Riverview and Alma, but we spend a great deal of time there still. Yeah, I think that I'm thinking of one particular event in the fall of '83 when we had our first book fair at Mactaquac, and it was an interesting event because Premier Richard Hatfield arrived with his chauffeur. And I was having supper, and Leona Keenan came in and said, "The premier's here. You've got to go see him." So I got up and I went into the room, and I introduced myself to Richard Hatfield, and he started buying books, and he started at one end of the room, and he went all the way around, and he bought a copy of every single book that was in the room. And his chauffeur was standing there with his hands below his waist and books tucked under his chin when he went out of the room. And it was one of those wonderful events. We hadn't had that kind of a book fair that I can remember. I'd never been to one like that before. It was all creative writers. And I launched my first book of poetry, or my third book of poetry, excuse me, at that fair. And these days with poetry, and especially, the numbers are going down so much that a lot of publishers are now backing out of publishing books of poetry, which is a real shame because we have some of the finest writers in North America living here. But I sold 50 copies of my book at that book fair. You couldn't do that today unless you were, a well-known Canadian or American poet, but 50 books. And my publisher was really happy to get the money because it basically paid for the cost of publishing the book, those first 50. And I find that the community has grown in New Brunswick simply because of the development of the Writers Federation. And I think younger writers perhaps are more liable now to go to more established writers or older writers and saying, "What do you think of this?" And and take advice and are sort of nurtured by older writers. And I think probably it's all because of the development of the federation in the province.
Richard Hatfield started giving out money. I forget exactly how the Arts New Brunswick evolved, but it did evolve. There was a kind of excitement, I think, and and Richard Hatfield himself, I think he was interested in all the arts and crafts, and was kind of a jolly, cheerful kind of a person who would be interested in the arts, and that made a huge difference, I think. But to hear Allan talking about selling 50 copies, it's kind of amazing. I think the whole thing that's amazing. I have a lot of poetry published, but Allan's right. It's not so much by the big publishers. It's very, it's little publishers. Well, maybe that's always been the way it is.
I think sometimes what happens is those little groundswells of small publishing companies, well, like your chapbook series. That's how I got to know of David Adams Richards' work and Brian Bartlett's work, and those were people that I wouldn't have met otherwise, I think, because of your publishing venture. Robert Gibbs, who else did you publish in that series, the New Brunswick chapbooks?
Oh, it was Kent and Jim Stewart, and they were all except one was a New Brunswicker, and Michael Pacey, and yes. And most of them went on to write more poetry, but some of them, disappeared. Michael Bryan Oliver. We didn't publish you. I don't know why we didn't publish you.
I was too young. They were older than I. I came along later.
Yes, it's true.
I was probably still in diapers when you started that.
Yes, that's right.
I just found it amazing because I remember, I don't know whether Brian Bartlett's poem, "This Bridge is No Bridge," was in that book. Or maybe it was the first one that Fred published after you published him. But you published him first,
I published him first, and then we had another one. So we published two of them,
Yeah. But there was one in there, and the poem still sticks with me. I told him when he was working on his selected poems a few years ago, how much that poem meant to me. And he said, well, other people have said that, but he said, I didn't think it was very good until later. And I'm sure it was was it Brothers Insomnia? Is that the book that you did?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was in that book. It might have been one of the early poems too. But that's how I got in touch with a lot of New Brunswick writers. I knew of Alden Nowlan because someone had given me a book of his in the late 60s, but I didn't know who my contemporaries were as I was getting going, you know. And yeah, it opened my eyes a lot.
I think that's such an important part that I've been kind of thinking in my head of a quote I heard the other day. I was talking with a friend and we were talking about, how slow things are when you're in them to change or to evolve. But when you look back and you see how important that time was and that comment you made there, Ellen, about, you know, being able to actually find your contemporaries in that moment
Mm-hmm.
and how powerful that is for driving things forward, like the legacy you three and everyone else who's been involved have created with the Federation over 40 years. It's such a powerful thing to bring people together and pull down those boundaries you were talking about. It's not just that these people are famous and writing about famous things. These are the people that live near me and write about what I see.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very powerful what you all helped create with that.
The people at the ice house at Tuesday night or McCord Hall, which you call it, were not published. One of the motivations for the New Brunswick chapbooks was to be published because the concept of chapbooks had kind of blossomed, and people were allowed to join the League of Canadian Poets if they had published a chapbook. So we did all start out at the same kind of the same level. My husband had not. I mean, he had written a PhD thesis on 18th century letter writing, but that was it. But I was having so much fun and was so excited about going to the ice house that he decided he wanted to come. And but in order to come, he had to write, so he started to write. And Bob Gibbs saw that poetry didn't get quite the big excitement that stories and novels did. It's true; it's difficult to understand poetry. It's profound, and there's no narrative thrust, and so one night he came and he had written a story, and he said he'd written it just because he wanted to be entertaining. There was that kind of mingling of things, why people wrote, and looking at the time, exactly as you said, Jenna, when you're in the middle of it, you don't see it, but from my perspective now, I'm amazed at how much one thing influenced the other. Um, and there was an excitement. I think the excitement had started in '67 was the Expo and Canada's birthday. Um, and after the war and the baby boomers, all that kind of thing, there was an excitement in the air. And I'm wondering now at this moment, explosion of Canadian uh, kind of nationalism, elbows up, we're not going to do this. Well, I was raised and educated in the United States and didn't come here until I was 31. and I'm 90. I'm going to be 91 very soon. I've always realized that Canada was very, very different from the United States. And I think the elbows up kind of thing is indicative of that. I mean, I could have told anyone who asked me that it is not going to be easy to annex Canada. And you maybe probably don't even want to. It's probably not be a good idea because it's a whole different, it just seems like the same. When my parents would come, my father would say, "Oh, it's just like the United States." And he would tell me something, and I would realize, no, he doesn't get it. It's just not at all like the United States, but more like New England. I think the emphasis of Bliss Common, the influence of the Transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thoreau have been immense here. I would say that, wouldn't you, Alan?
Absolutely. There's something else I wanted to add about Bill. I told you this a few years ago, I think. Coleman Barks, the American translator, the famous American translator of Rumi, went to university with Bill, right?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And I was in touch with him a few years ago with Coleman, and we had quite an exchange for a couple of years. And I told him about Unsnarling String. He said, how much did because Bill, I don't know whether he was writing at that time or he was maybe not writing a lot when they went to university together. He ordered a copy of Unsnarling String on Amazon, and then he sent me a box of his own books, 6 or 7 of his own book, Coleman Barks's translations and his own poetry. And in the inside of one, he said, he put, "Remembering Bill Bauer, his presence lives on." So you have one of the probably the most famous American translator who went to university with Bill Bauer, who came to New Brunswick and influenced a lot of us. And then like 40 years later, he's influencing Coleman Barks. So I love that big circle.
Yes,
of things.
It's wonderful. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he read that book, and he mentioned in the letter which poems particularly struck him, but he said the whole book was lovely. So.
Rhonda, I'd love to bring you back into the conversation on that point of kind of that those full circle moments and looking back over 40 years and kind of give us a snapshot of how this fits into what the Federation is doing now and is looking forward to.
Well, I joined the Writers Federation of New Brunswick in 2010 as a new writer who was not published, who had a manuscript that probably wasn't that great, but I had high hopes for it. I had written my first book when I was 15 on a typewriter my parents gave me for Christmas. And I didn't, because I shot for the moon and sent my romance spy novel that I wrote at 15 to McClelland and Stewart, figured that they would publish it because they published Margaret Atwood. Why wouldn't they want my book? And I got this big rejection but a hand typed, like an editor bothered to actually type out a rejection for me and say, "Don't give up, keep writing. Here are all the publishers who publish books." And I'm just telling you that because I think that for me, the Writers Federation, just as an aspiring writer, made it possible for me to not give up. And it's because of the writers who I met, who were established and really good writers, and kind of took me under their wing. And I don't know, they felt sorry for me or something, but I really appreciated that, and I feel like I've gotten so much out of this organization. So I think even though the structure might be a little more formal with the programs that we do regularly through the year, the heart of it is still the same. And we still don't have a tiered membership. If no matter who you are, you can be a member. And I think it gives more established writers an opportunity to shepherd writers who are not to but have big dreams. And I really appreciate our more senior writers. I mean senior as in as an accomplishment, not necessarily an age, although I think they sometimes go together, age and accomplishment. And so for full circle moments, I would say that all of our programs run together in order to create that. So we send writers into the schools to encourage young people. We have young people submit stories to the Sheree Fitch Prize for Young Writers in the Brunswick Writing Competition. We've had in my time as ED since 2021, I've seen quite a few, like some kids submit things just because their teacher is encouraging it. And some people submit because you can see it. It's 15-year-old Rhonda, you can see it. The person wants to be a writer. They need to express themselves through words. And then, you get someone who, like Thomas Chamberlain this year, he submitted a book, a manuscript twice to the David Adams Richards Prize. He won. He got an honorable mention the first year. He took it back. He took that as encouragement. He got an editor. He really worked hard. He submitted it again. The next year, he won second prize. And this year, he got a book deal. And so, isn't that awesome? That's what we're all here for. And, and who knows, he might submit that book in the next year and the next two to the book awards. And he has an opportunity to win that. And I don't know. I just think it's very rewarding. I think you can do a lot with a little. We still don't have huge resources, but I think with what we have, we do our best to really create that grassroots opportunity to connect and learn from one another.
One thing is that we've just not had the right amount of money. We're so much the poorest federation. And part of that is that we kind of missed the real time when money was being given out, and that was around 1967, and afterwards, when the federal government was giving money and provinces were giving money, and when we came along, that was not such a priority for the governments. And so, for example, we've never had, enough money to pay Rhonda. I mean, we pay her, but we don't pay her anywhere near enough. We've never had really an office. Maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. I mean, do people get
But
too...
there's something to the magic of the grassroots nature of the group.
If they have enough money, I don't know. People have to be passionate about and do, much more and with much more enthusiasm than they get paid for.
I think maybe in this modern day of internet connection, that a brick and mortar location is really not as important as it used to be, or it might have been. It might make some things easier, and it really just depends on who the ED is. I know that in the past, when you've had EDs in Fredericton, they've had space at the Charlotte Street Arts Center or something like that. For me, I have a home office, and it suits me just fine. And, we can be nimble. We don't have a lot of the expenses that are attached to that. So I think that's not the biggest worry. I think just having enough resources to pad our awards programs, particularly, to be able to offer bigger prizes, to pay the judges more, that kind of thing, I think would
Yeah.
maybe just to sustain those programs in the long run would be what I think we need resources for. And some philanthropists to come along and say, I want to
Yes.
sew
Yeah.
into this organization. So I have to seek those people out.
Well, if we're lucky, maybe they're listening to this and we'll hear the call. Before we end our time together, I just wanted to give each of you an opportunity to share some final thoughts, whether it's about the history or the future or just what writing in New Brunswick means to you. And maybe Anne, we'll start with you.
Well, yes, thank you. Because one of the things that my daughter Ann and I've been talking back and forth, she would like to do a history display, which is interesting. And I have some things here, including a lot of the little chapbooks and poetry books that began early on. I'm a pretty good saver of things. And I also come across a couple of nice articles about Maritime Writers Workshop, that kind of thing. And so Rayanne did ask that in this information session that we kind of search around and bring some things if you'd like to display them. So I'm doing my best to get, I've got most of Alden Nowlan's books, and I thought I had some of Fred Cogswell chapbooks. I haven't found them yet, but I'm sure I have some of Allan Cooper's books. But Allan, you probably have copies of some of yours too.
I do.
Some of the few early.
I stored away a few away for my daughter.
Yeah, well, I know some of the early ones because I was always fun to buy your books. I always buy your books, and I'm sure I have them all at one point. But anyway, I've been collecting them because we'd like to have a little bit of a display of some of those early productions and any photos or anything that you want to present. I think she'd be happy to have them. So anyway, that's one little project that we're working on.
Yeah, I'll try to get some stuff together for you.
Yeah, and just maybe in summation, I have to say that somewhat like Nancy, I think I'm going to be very sentimental because never, I think, in our wildest dreams when this began, would we ever realize that in 40 years from now, we'd be sitting here celebrating it. Number one, I didn't think I was going to last that long. Every time I turn around, I think, okay, I'm still here and still writing. Actually, I'm doing the Fairy Chronicles book 3 at my age. Is kind of exciting that I'm now doing what I love, and it's so much fun, and I'm not as hung up as I would have been 50 years ago. I think you're right because you love it, and you just get up in the morning and think, how many pages can I do today, as opposed to what you're looking at it a completely different way. It's you're right because you have to. I remember writing an article to myself about getting up in the morning and knowing that I had to sit down and write in my journal. I've done that my whole entire life. And then every once in a while, I'll read my journal and come across these gems and think, wow, did I really write that? So you're born to write. And I think that to go back to the beginning, these are changing times. And they say that the poets are always the leaders. They're always the leaders that write the songs and write the poems that inspire people, and that people need that inspiration now. And they need us to continue with the poems, and they need us to write our stories, and they need us to dream. We need to dream the future, and that's our role. And don't be afraid to be outlandish, and dream big, and pass that torch to the young people. That's why we're here. So it's been my pleasure to be part of a group of dedicated friends that I've grown to love over the years, and it's been really special.
I think Anne has summed it all up for me. And the fact that she's still nurturing people, and Nancy is still nurturing and encouraging people. And me and now in my 70s, I'm using them as examples. It doesn't matter how old the writer is or whether they're beginners or whatever. I think we can all just feel the love and keep doing it. That's all.
Beautiful. Rhonda, do you have anything to say before we let Nancy have the last word?
Oh gosh. Like I said, I joined in 2010 and I was on the board in 2017 or 18, and I was the president. I felt like I wanted to give back the amount of encouragement that has been given to me and mentorship by WFNB members. And I just appreciate the organization very much. I think it's worthy, and I think people are always better together.
Nancy, we're going to leave the last thoughts with you and your back to your living room.
Yes, I've always felt hugely grateful uh, to destiny or whatever it was that it landed me here, because there couldn't have been a more perfect place for me. It was close enough to New England that it seemed familiar, but as I've said, far enough away to be exotic. There was so much excitement going on, so many people. I had absolute luck in this house. Bill and I chose it just on a whim, really. Well, we couldn't find an apartment, and so the living room turned out to be a comfortable place for people, so that there was so much to do and so much excitement, and uh, I just have, looking back now all those years, I'm thinking how wonderful it was, how grateful I am. And it was wonderful for Bill, too. I mean, I think the university was the perfect place for him. It was a wonderful place to bring up children. And then to have all these people who were so creative and interesting. And I mean, Anne, Anne had me up to her farm, and I went through a labyrinth and uh, in a fairy garden or fairy trail. I forget what you call it, Anne. And Alan and uh, I, I wrote when I was in the hospital a year ago. I had the most amazing experience that I've written about one of Alan's books. I've written to him and showed him what I've written. There seemed just to be something in the air for me here, and so to have had this opportunity to, to step in when people said, "Oh, yeah, let's have a Maritime Writers Workshop," or Kent Thompson said to my husband, tell Nancy to come to our writers group," and then somebody said, "Well, it would be great to have some chapbooks," and Mary Lynn, why don't we start the Maritime Writers Workshop? And Alan and others saying, "Oh, the Writers Federation, that'd be a great idea." It just went from place to place, and all of a sudden I was in the midst of all this, and was just happening. Nothing I did to deserve it, but to have become part of this is just could not have been better, really, not at all.
I think that's a beautiful place to leave our discussion today. And on behalf of all of the the writers and aspiring writers in the province, I would like to thank all of you who had a hand in starting the Federation and getting these first 40 years under the belt, and looking forward to what's to come next. So thank you so much for today and for everything you've done.
Thank you.
Thank you to my guests for this discussion, Nancy Bauer, Ann Brennan, Allan Cooper, and Rhonda Bulmer. My name is Jenna Morton. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a listen to our first season, featuring my discussions with 6 New Brunswick writers, sharing their thoughts on writing in this place, the role of the Writers Federation of New Brunswick, and the importance of encouraging everyone to share their own stories.
WordCraft is a project by the nonprofit Writers Federation of New Brunswick. The show is hosted and produced by Jenna Morton, with technical production by Tosh Taylor. The Writers Federation of New Brunswick acknowledges that the land on which we live, work, and gather is the traditional unceded territory of the Wolastoq and Mi'kmaq peoples. We honor the spirit of our ancestors' treaties of peace and friendship.